James and I today are going to be talking about the benefits of doing more than just your day job. So we're all busy, we're all working lots of hours, particularly at the moment. But actually, sometimes it's really beneficial to step back from that and add value elsewhere. And James is somebody I've known for a long time. I was trying to remember when we first met, James. I was trying to remember which year it was, and I couldn't remember. I can't
Many
remember.
moons ago.
Many moons ago. One of the things I admire about James is that he makes time for other things in addition to a busy day job, and he'll tell us a bit more about that in a minute. But alongside his corporate career, he also does a range of different voluntary activities. He works as a trustee for a charity, and he's also a coach, a fellow coach. And actually, James has been my coach in the past. Yes, I can recommend him highly. So we're going to find out more. We're going to find out more from James, but just talk more generally as well about the benefits of doing more, but also some really practical things like how to position that with your main employer, and and so forth. So James, before we kick into questions, I'm going to hand over to you to just introduce yourself. Do tell us a little bit more about you, and I guess James, outside of all the work stuff, just tell us a little bit more about who you are.
So, hello everyone. It's great to be here, and as Ellie said, really pleased that the text worked so smoothly so far. So I'm James, as Ellie mentioned. I'm the Global Chief People Officer for a media agency called Wavemaker. We are the 5th largest agency, and we have about 7,000 people. We're $1 billion revenue business, and I try and juggle that with being a father of 3, so 3 girls, and they are 7, soon to be 8, 10, and 19-year-old. And it feels like I'm more like a hotel for the 19-year-old. So I don't know if it's kind of fathering or just putting a roof over their heads. And as Ellie said, I also run my own private practice as an executive coach. Up until last year, I was a trustee for a charity called Future Men, which was really helping disadvantaged young boys and men kind of make the right choices in life rather than going into crime and particularly gangs. And as Ellie mentioned, also I have a kind of passion to kind of give back. So I do a bit of fundraising. So I've done all sorts of sponsored car rallies across Europe, and I also help with a local group here where I live, helping the homeless in London in terms of being fed. And I've also been and continue to be a mentor, both with universities I went to, but also kind of high potential schemes that a couple of search firms in London also do as well.
You're a busy man, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't get bored.
Don't get one. No, that's lovely. Well, no, thank you for that intro. We've had some more people join us as well while we've just been introducing ourselves. A special hello to Debbie. I was going to say Debbie Pask, but she's Debbie Thompson on here. Hello, Debbie, and hello to Hello to Jan as well, and thank you for your question earlier, and we're going to be getting around to that shortly. And please, if anybody else does have any questions, please just pop them into the chat as well, and do get involved. Or if you just want to, have a bit of banter, that's fine too. we like to keep these sessions fun as well as informative. So James, so you do masses there, which is absolutely wonderful. Take me back in time and tell me what was the first thing that you did that was, I guess, outside of your sort of your day job. What was the first sort of extracurricular giving back type activity that you did?
Do you know, I really struggle thinking back to where it first started. I think I've always had this innate thing about wanting to be busy and various side hustles. So I think when I think about kind of work, I started my career with Ford, and it was one of the few companies that really threw itself headlong into CSR. And so it was a kind of natural thing, you'd always do it. And so I remember going to an old people's home and doing some painting for the day, which kind of sounds a bit innocuous, but actually when you start seeing the impacts of a change on a day, and then actually getting letters back from the group about how tough the hospice actually is in terms of its financials and just the kind of life it breathed back into it, it's really humbling to know that's your impact. And I think it's kind of just gone from there. And I think, in HR, naturally, you get into positions where you're quite privileged in getting very, personal conversations. And actually with some line managers, you end up coaching as well. So I think that also became a stream very early in my career that then grew arms and legs and developed beyond that. So, yeah, and I think suppose the other thing is kind of growing up with two parents that were always very active. You know, my mother was one that always wanted to do something else, always learn something new, and I think that's one of the things that comes from me. And unfortunately, I lost my dad when I was 11, and I think again what that created me was a huge amount of drive and probably a very strong leaning towards cancer charities, because we lost him with cancer. So, you know, I've always wanted to give back. And when you start looking at some of the care that you get, unfortunately, if you're in that situation, actually some of the charities do a phenomenal job. And I think, you know, I've been privileged to get to a certain point where I can give back. And I think that's quite an important part of who I am, really.
Yeah, no, that, yeah, and that personal impact is so, you know, it's so significant as well, isn't it? It you know, it makes such a big difference. So tell me, so you've obviously you've done a range of things throughout. Today, what are the things you're doing right now on top of your CPO role?
Yeah, so I mentioned I still have an active coaching practice. So I have 3 corporate clients and a couple of personal clients that I still do on top of the day job. I was a charity trustee up until the end of last year, and currently going through a process to apply for a new trusteeship. So fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Oh, well,
and then
good luck.
Thank you. And I also am a mentor, both internally within my job, but also externally. And I'm just in the kind of latter stages of potentially being a mentor for Warwick Business School.
Oh,
so,
fantastic!
Again, fingers crossed.
Yeah, and the mentoring, that's an interesting one actually. On the mentoring, do you go through any particular organisation, or is it more sort of on a case by case basis where you sort of volunteer?
It's a bit of a case-by-case basis, actually. I've kind of been really interested in supporting startups. So I've helped a lot of startup CEOs, and there's a couple of charities that specialise in that. But also I get approached by, you know, old universities that I studied at, and I was, again, quite keen to give something back to them. And then there's been a couple of organisations in London that have just tried to develop some relationships. So I've gone through that.
Yeah, no, there's for those that are listening in Singapore, there's an organisation called Protégé here. I've actually signed up to volunteer to mentor with them. But I think, you know, there are some bodies, but there aren't many actually. I think people who want to mentor often have to almost kind of you know, go out there and look for it. Yeah, I think there is a gap in the market for sort of maybe like a more structured, in the UK, some sort of body that can kind of link mentors with mentees, because I think there's various charities doing different things, but there's not so much of that. But so this is the $50 million question. How do you fit it all in? And you know, you've got the girls there, you've got the family commitments, you've got the day job commitments, you've got your coaching practice, and you're doing lots of voluntary stuff. So on a serious note, how do you juggle your time? How do you prioritize and make it all work?
It's a great question, and one that's a continual battle, if I'm honest. So there's times I don't get it right.
Do you sleep? Do you ever get any sleep, James?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think it's a case of there's a lot of juggling, and I don't get to watch a lot of TV.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But I think it comes back to what's really important, and you know, I suppose one of the pivotal moments I think back in my career is when I was at Barclays. I left Barclays and decided just to take some time out for me, which felt incredibly indulgent at the time, but actually probably the thing I look back at with the most value. And what came out of it was almost to try the portfolio career. And so I did a piece of consulting that really kind of paid the day job. I actually looked at setting up my own charity, which was just so insightful. And then doing the coaching work. And, you know, I reflect back on it thinking that it was definitely the right move to do, but it probably came a bit early. I think actually after doing some consulting stuff for 3 years, I felt like there was still a couple of big jobs left in me and wanting to come back into corporate. But equally, I wasn't ready to let go of it either. And I think that helped me reframe, actually, this is me. And I have to find a balance, that sometimes it kind of ebbs and flows. So part of the reason for not being the trustee of Future Men now was actually the day job was becoming too much. I was traveling so much that I wasn't being able to make some of the board meetings. And after 5 years, there was a fixed term of 6. It kind of felt like I've had a good innings, but I just wasn't really fulfilling my duties. So, you do have to prioritize, and you have to make some tough calls. And then I think there's a lot about just being really purposeful about the time that you have. So at the weekends, I will make sure that I'm with the girls doing their homework, or I'm home for a couple of bedtimes. But it is hard, right? It's a continual thing. But I think when it becomes part of you and what's important to you, then you prioritize to try and make things work. But I don't know if I've quite got the answer yet.
Yeah, well, no, and actually, I think many people have tried, for that answer, and I think, there's that quote, isn't there, saying you can do all the things, but not all at once.
Yeah.
That's not the exact quote, but that kind of almost having to prioritize, and I suppose things maybe go in peaks and troughs as well. I guess this year's been an interesting one, of course, with the travel having pretty much completely disappeared for all the year. So have you found this year that you've had more time back to do more, or has that time been taken by all the bonkers things like homeschooling and so forth?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, ironically, I've not been on a plane for coming up to, since February. So you'd think actually I'd have loads of time, but I don't think that's actually been the reality. I think most people would kind of chime with this in the sense of it's just been crazy to try and get used to the impacts of COVID, and then sat in an organisation, particularly as a CPO, the duty of care that you need to have in terms of making sure people are safe, but also protecting the business, has been a real juggling act in itself. And so maybe the time that I had in a plane has just been taken up with Zoom meetings. I think that, if anything, ironically, it's probably helped underline the importance for the portfolio, though, because I think actually, doing days worth of Zoom calls can be absolutely knackering. And so for me, although it does feel, full on, the ability to toggle between work and almost stop that for an hour and a half and then do something on the charity side or do something on the coaching side, again, can be exhausting, but actually is a break. And then that in itself can just, recharge and replenish. So I've enjoyed the ability to kind of toggle between stuff. It's been an adjustment. So kind of coaching like this is a big shift. And actually what you find, or I found particularly when I was part of the charity, when we were looking at, could we do remote working with the charity, it's a real pressure for them. And so, things like revenues under a lot of pressure, and just the way they're working, a lot of the charities aren't set up like this, that you'd expect the infrastructure that you see in a corporate world. So again, there's probably more pressure in the system that actually I think then kind of leaks out into how you manage your time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned a few minutes ago, you said that, the portfolio career, that period of time showed you that this is who you are, and this is the James package. Tell me how you've managed that now, having returned into the corporate world. You're back in a big job, a big sort of full-time job. How did you manage that conversation, and when in the recruitment process did you mention your sort of other commitments? Because I know a lot of people in the group, it's something that we've talked about where, it's almost like, well, how bold can you be, when you're interviewing for a job versus, do you have to wait and kind of just then later ask permission kind of thing? How have you managed that?
I mean, I've been really upfront. I think, as I said, there's going to be some flex. So I've never come in and said I have to have this, and this. But what I have said, really, in the selection process, I'm kind of mindful Debbie's actually on the call, who also helped me go through this process. Was actually very.
On camera?
We should, and get a different view. But what I said with the people that I met was, this is me, and it's about reframing that actually there's some bits that are non-negotiable. And so, I think for me, I was choosing an opportunity that really kind of got me excited, but allowed me to do this and the other stuff. It wasn't necessarily a compromise. And I know that might sound quite luxurious to have the choice. And by no means, at the time I really did need to, start thinking about income. So you're constantly kind of, balancing that piece. But I think it just becomes part of me. And, what the last 3-year period really helped me understand about how I can show up. And so the ability to have these other elements that just gave me something quite passionate actually helps me become more resilient, actually gave me much more food for thought and some impacts that made me think differently, that actually becomes a benefit to the organisation. And with my current employer, it was an open discussion that said actually I could also coach internally, subject to some conflicts of interest. So we've kind
Yeah,
of
of
given
course.
back that way. And I also am a massive believer in terms of the partnership of corporate sector and the third sector. And so, there are benefits for the charity of getting the expertise in the corporate life, as well as the skills that people can refine and develop in corporate world by working with charities, so consulting or understanding really what the client needs, etc.
Yeah,
So there's a bit of a kind of win-win in that.
yeah,
So I think to answer your question, I think it's be bold if it's important to you.
yeah.
I think there's some levels of flex, but actually this is what they're hiring, and without that, they're not really getting the full need.
They're not. No, that's really true. And actually, I'm going to ask you a bit more in a minute about that kind of, benefits for you, benefits for the organisation. But I'm interested to know, because this is a question I got asked a lot when I was headhunting. How early in the process, the recruitment process, did you talk about your additional, your kind of, your coaching practice and the trustee role? Was that, was it on your CV and they knew about it from day one, or was it was it something you introduced, and if so, at what stage?
It was definitely on the CV.
Yeah,
I think I'm pretty sure it was in the first interview. It was
yeah,
definitely in the second. So
yeah,
the first interview was with the group CPO at the time, and the second was with the chairman. So it was part of that, and again, I think one of the benefits I would say with this is maybe not just with this process, because I think some of it's about expectations and being really clear about the expectations, and going through a selection process is the company choosing you as well as you choosing the company,
of course.
and it's that kind of two-way thing. I think it's important. The other bit is actually it helps you in the for me, I found it helped me in the interview process, because it gives me something else to talk about that helps me stick out for people.
Yeah.
I have had interviews where I've not got the job, but I've actually got a coaching assignment out of it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And we've
So
built
a little bit
relationships
of
off it.
BD, BD on the
Yeah,
side.
yeah. Um,
That's very good.
so
Yeah.
so I think in some ways it becomes a bit of a hook, because I think in an interview process, an interviewer is going to be meeting so many people, and it's the ones that kind of really stand out that give you something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really
Yeah,
important.
that's really useful. Do you think if anybody's listening that's maybe earlier on in their career and they're not, at that C-suite level like you are, do you think the same applies, or do you think that they would need to do anything differently in terms of sort of managing that approach?
It's a really good question. I mean, I'm really mindful about not making a very generalist comment. I mean, I think it really depends on the individual and what your
For
time
sure.
commitment is and what you're looking for. I mean, my experience has been one that actually the more senior I've got, I suppose, the more time I've had to kind of develop these other things. I think more
Yeah.
junior in your career, actually it becomes part of the proposition I think a company can give you. I've asked for that in part of the
Yeah.
interview process when I've been going for other jobs earlier in my career. So I think it depends on where you are in terms
Yes.
of your interest, what your commitments are. I still think it's a relevant conversation to have, though, if it's
Yeah.
part of you.
Definitely. No, and I always, my clients I work with, at various levels, often like yourself, are kind of C-suite professionals, but some aren't. And I'm always sort of encouraging people to kind of own their story and to
Yeah.
be proud of who they are and what their values are and what they believe in. And actually, I'd be interested in your view, but certainly for me, when I was hiring, for me, it just made a candidate more interesting and more positive. It doesn't detract in any way, as
No.
long as they're, they manage their time appropriately, and there's no conflict of interest and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because I think where it's done well, it shows real drive.
Yeah, yeah.
And like I say, you can kind of bring stuff from other worlds into this that you get from it incredibly. So no, I totally agree. I think there's lots of benefits to it, and I also think actually as we start looking at the different kind of generations coming into the workplace, the importance of purpose and the importance of having variety of different projects are going to become more and more important for people to want to come to a company, and people choosing companies as much as companies choosing individuals.
Yeah, I think you're right. I feel like this year, I don't know what you feel, but I feel like this year it's almost put more of a spotlight than ever on the kind of wider, values and purpose of organizations. And it's sort of, I don't know, I don't know if it's me. You tell me what you think, but almost it sort of no longer feels enough to just be like, well, we're here to get as much possible shareholder value and make as much profit, and that's it, kind of thing. I don't know. It sort of feels to me that that's maybe less relevant these days. What's your view?
I mean, I think there's definitely been a shift. I think the stakeholders that companies now are held accountable for have increased. I think, one of the things that I would take out of COVID is, in certain pockets, a re-establishment of community. And I think actually that will start pervading into expectations of people coming into the workplace. I think, again, we've seen a massive spike in people being much more conscious around sustainability and environmental issues. And I think companies are at a kind of pivot point. I think it's really easy to say that we're a purpose-led organisation, but actually I think you have to have some authenticity with that. And with technology and different platforms, you're starting to get the ability to peer into companies like you never had before.
Yeah.
And so to say one thing and then not have it delivered,
Yeah.
actually, I think companies will get found out. And so I
Yeah,
think it's
more
really,
visible.
I think it's really important to have something that's really authentic in terms of that purpose that you live through, rather than it's just another marketing gimmick. But I do think it'll become more and more important for people in terms of their choice of employer and engagement with the employer once they're in.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess going back to the title of this session, what I'd love to know from you is kind of the benefits that you've found from doing this. So there's obvious benefits like, supporting a charity and the benefits to them, but tell us a bit more about kind of how you've benefited personally, and kind of, I guess, what you've learned from it, how it's sort of added to you.
I suppose the honest answer to that is it's helped me in a number of different levels. So on one hand, it's helped me learn a lot about me. Going through a coaching qualification to understand who you are as a coach. I mean, you'll know this is quite a self-discovering process. So learning, who you are, warts and all, is quite a tough thing to go through, but incredibly rewarding. And I think for me, the shift in the charity sector, the corporate sector, has been a brilliant one just to change perspective. I've worked in small startups through to large multinational corporates, but when you start going into a charity sector, I came in with a lot of assumptions, which are a load of rubbish. I underestimated how competitive the charity sector was. I had a very naive view that they'd work together, they'd play in the same sandbox for the good of the end user. But actually, funding is so tough that actually it's incredibly competitive. And some of these charities live literally month to month. I mean, I remember the first charity meeting that I came into, and we didn't go through the finances, to see the charity celebrating that they've got to 1.3 months worth of reserves. I was horrified because most corporates wouldn't want to get to that point. We'd be quite nervous. So having a reframe of actually what good looks like in this world, and then learning what this world is like and the influence it can have on policy and governments, I think has been a great insight for me. And I think there's also a big shift when you come from being, in an exco where you're an executive, to then actually playing the role of a non-executive, but with responsibility for the governance of that charity. It makes you question how you get comfort in some of that to make sure that you're complying with your own responsibilities, because you can't just go from that meeting and then go and speak to people and actually do it yourself. You're having to ask the right questions. You're having to try and get a feel for the organisation. So I think that has really helped me think about my questions, my impact, and the way I approach things. And I suppose the other thing is it's just life events. I look back, and the amount of pride that I've got with the charity in some of the stuff it was doing in inner city schools, is just absolutely awesome. Right through to a charity event where we had Grace and Perry, and listening to Grace and Perry, kick off a charity auction for us that gave us a year's worth of, or about 8 months worth of additional income, was just phenomenal. So those life experiences just give you a different perspective. And again, I think there's something about being a father of 3 children, making sure that they also kind of know how lucky they are, as well as striving for things, has been a big thing that's part of the psyche.
Yeah. Wendy's just asked us a question. Hello to Wendy. In fact, you met Wendy at a charity ball that we all went to together.
Hi, Wendy.
because we like to support the charities. So Wendy, Wendy has asked, what's the best way to find a charity to approach as a trustee? So how have you gone about finding your trustee positions?
I think there's probably kind of three main routes that I'd probably draw you to.
Oh, we
Hello,
have a
you still there?
technical problem.
That was magic, and you've
Technical
reappeared.
problem. You see, that's the problem when you scroll through comments and accidentally hit the wrong button. That was just a view of my curtains there, but that could have been much worse, couldn't it?
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, to answer Wendy's question, I got my charity trustee role through an advert that I happened to see, and so I think charities are becoming more and more open to different experiences, and I think they're advertising in different spaces, but there will be certain press or websites that specialize in the third sector and charity, so kind of keep an eye out for those. The second thing I would say is network. That a lot of this becomes actually word of mouth, and so the more that you can have networks that can see opportunities or hear about opportunities, then shout. And then I think the other thing is a lot of charities, and again, if you look at particularly for the UK in the governance frameworks, they will talk about charity trustees having limited time as a trustee, and so there's natural turnover. So if you have a charity that you're actually passionate about, I'd definitely recommend you then contacting the charity, whether it's the chair or the CEO, because actually if they're following the governance, there will be opportunities that will come up during certain periods of time.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. And just to add on that, those of you that joined the last Facebook Live I did with Alison, when we were talking about non-exec director positions, we also mentioned women on boards, which supports not just women, but yeah, that's another great source. I know that they list a lot of trustee opportunities on there as well, Wendy, so it might be worth signing up with them to get their job alerts. Smashing. Okay, so Jan messaged earlier with another question, which kind of builds on the last point, which we talked about how you have benefited and how it sort of develops you and your roles. But Jan was interested to understand whether you think there have also been benefits for the business that you've been in. I'm imagining there are, because if you're better, then your day job's better. Yeah. But are there any specific things that stand out to you, where you could kind of say, well, I kind of went into the business and said, this is me, this is part of me, but actually they've got some good things because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned, particularly as a coach, the ability to actually offer some coaching and mentoring within the organisation. And again, I would put lots of caveats around making sure that there's safety. And sometimes as the CPO or the HR director, it can be slightly constrained if you're doing certain coaching. And I have found that. But I think offering coaching and mentoring where, again, you'd have to kind of pay for that, I think can be a benefit, and it has been with my current employer. I think there are charities that, as I mentioned, there's an opportunity to try and find the win-win. So in the UK, for example, Pilot Light is a great charity that actually looks to take execs from companies and build a kind of mini consulting team, and they go into a charity of choice to then do a 6 or 9 month project with that charity. So the charity benefits, but also the people from the organisation are starting to develop, commercial skills or influencing skills or relationship skills. So I think that's a big one. And what you're also finding, I think, to your point before about stakeholders, is companies are under a lot more scrutiny now. So, like most WPP on an annual basis, will talk about its sustainability reports and really what some of its senior execs are doing in terms of helping communities. And so by saying that I'm part of a charity, immediately I'm onto the sustainability report, as a number of the execs are, in helping other charities and other smaller organisations kind of prosper.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realise that was something that got reported. So that gets reported in the annual report. Oh, that's great. Okay, so sort of a very open way of sharing what the people in the business are doing. That's good. So as a CPO or HR director yourself, when you're hiring for the organisation, do you look at people's CVs and look for additional things that they're doing outside of just the day job? Is it a factor for you when you're hiring?
It is, yeah. I mean, I think as we've mentioned before, I suppose I come from it that you want to give everyone as much chance as you can. And so, I think what we're seeing now is actually what's transferable. If you don't have the specific experience, what's transferable? And I think some of these experiences in a charity or, some of these kind of other side hustle things can add some real value to as I said before, there's a lot of behavioural stuff that comes from it. So it shows drive, it shows commitment. And I think, I think back at the people I remember, it's the people that had something different about them. And, in a really competitive world, sometimes it is those small things that, really do make a difference. And I would say, the more junior you are in your career, even more important it is to do that, to try and give yourself that narrative, as you said, and that kind of full offering. So, yeah, no, it definitely is something I'd look for. I think it adds something to someone's application.
Yeah, and likewise as well. I think, sort of back to my headhunter days, it takes me right back earlier than that as well. Do you remember sort of back in the day when we were applying for university, those of us that went to uni, I remember you had to fill in the old UCAS form or whatever it was called. And I remember even back then, the teachers would say to us, it's not just about your academic grades. So it's not good enough to just list, I got 10 A's. I didn't get 10 A's, but if I'd got 10 A's, it's not good enough to just say, I got all these A's. Actually, even as early as that in your life, universities were looking for those extracurricular activities. So I remember I was sort of volunteering for this, that, and the other, and going on this committee and that. Even as a sixth former. And I think the same stands. I can't, when I was looking at CVs then of people throughout their career, I'd almost be a little bit disappointed if someone had a really straight-laced corporate CV and didn't mention anything outside of that. People, I've had the debate many times with people about, should I put some interests on my CV? And I think, how much you want to share of yourself is a very personal decision. But I always say, if they're doing anything like, they're a governor at their child's school, or they're, they do, they coach their son's football team, or whatever it is, I always say, add that on, because, and whether that's as sort of, I guess as grand as a sort of non-exec director post, or whether it's something that's more, maybe more smaller scale or more ad hoc. I sort of feel like it just adds more to the person than just this kind of, yes, I went to a great uni and I did all these blue chip jobs and I'm very senior and important, but it's kind of like, and I don't know. I've always felt like that as well. It's.
I think there's also something about how you kind of develop yourself, isn't it? I mean, I shouldn't admit this on your podcast, but I think my first interest was collecting beer mats. So right from the get go, I had to find something else that replaced that. I couldn't have that on my CV. I'm sure I've taken it off.
I also collected beer mats as a student.
That says a lot about us, probably, and how we spent our time. But I think there is something about how you kind of develop those interests and develop you. I remember having someone once say to me, he had this theory about our perception of time, and our perception of time, as he argued it, was related to the last time you learned something new. And so when you're a child, time feels like it goes on forever because you're actually learning quite a lot of new things. Whereas as you get older, you get into a bit more of a routine. And so I remember he said to me, look, just go through what are the last memories that really kind of bring a smile to your face. And so it was all the natural stuff of, kids being born, marriage, etc., etc. But suddenly you start realizing those years become 1 or 2 years to 2 or 3 years. And so then you start, I'm doing it now. I did it with you actually yesterday about where's the year gone? This is going really quickly.
Yeah, this year has as well, hasn't it? Everyone said that the time this year's been, crazy. Just so that argument would be because we're just learning so much.
Well, no, because actually, you're not learning enough. And so the routine just means that it kind of then merges into one. So what it drove for me was actually every year I'm going to do something that becomes that's the memory for that year, and a lot of it became charity events, for example. But I think it's similar when you think about work. Great thing to say, and I don't always do it, but dust your CV off every 6 months to understand what have you just added to your CV. And if you're not adding, kind of question why you're not doing it. And I think things like, the additional bits around helping charities or, side hustles, whatever, are all things you can consider adding to your CV. Because do you know what? In 12 months' time, if you haven't done it, you suddenly realise, God, where's the 12 months gone? I look at the CV, it's the same CV as it was before, right?
Yeah.
So there is something about actually just having that kind of discipline just to stop, take stock, and actually think about where do you want to be. I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good advice. So, thinking back in time, to, sort of when you were at that point of kind of, starting your career, come out of education, what advice would you give to yourself back then if you could go back and, share some nuggets of wisdom?
Stop collecting beer mats. No, I think when I think back at my younger self, or what I've learned since, I think there's something about actually investing in yourself can feel incredibly indulgent, but actually is so, so important. And so if you have something you're passionate about, find a way just to kind of make that work. It might be a balancing act, but don't lose sight of it. There's always a way to make things work. I think that's one. I'd definitely say get into coaching earlier. It's been such a valuable experience for me just to learn about me, as well as meeting some incredible people, and the trust that people give you is just phenomenal. So I think learning from that early would be one. I've always found that I put my own limitations in it. So when I first started thinking about trusteeship, I was thinking, actually, am I old enough? Have I got enough experience? And I've kind of put myself off doing it. And I had the debate with the chair when I was applying for the charity, and he was saying, I'm surprised you left it this long. And we had this debate about, perceptions of time again. And one thing that I would look back on is, I probably put my own barriers in that might not have always been there. And so don't be the person that kind of stops yourself, let other people make that decision for you, would be one. And then the big one is network. I think you have to have a network, and you have to invest in the network. And I think for me, the network has to be a two-way thing. I don't think it's, go around all the headhunters when you need a job and then nothing else in between.
Debbie will probably agree that we have seen that as headhunters. There are some people that do that. Yep.
But I think as I get older, as I think about the different spheres that I'm in, my network has been incredibly invaluable. So the support that I can get the charity because of my network, or some of the stuff that I've done in my day job, has been the product of a network that I've invested in. And people talk about it, but it's very easy to talk about and not do it.
Yeah. So how do you make sure you do it? What are the James Edgar tips on the networking? So you said sort of make sure it's two-way and it's not just when you need something. But how do you make it happen? And what for you? What are your sort of preferred ways to connect with people?
God, this is where I sound
over a beer.
Yeah. But I think it has to be fun, right? I don't. Yeah. I'm not one for just going out and pressing palms for the sake of it. I want to go out and meet people that actually, either stimulate me or of interest. I think there's also something about don't take it too seriously. There is something that says, you just don't know what might come up in the future. So having a really good network where you can kind of give and take, so it's two-way. You enjoy doing it. So, when you actually want to, go out for an evening instead of coming home and seeing the kids, it is a trade-off, but you're doing it because you want to do it, and there is a kind of a payback at some point. And then I also found that sounds like kind of a Beatles song, isn't it? Like it comes together, but there are times where you can just kind of plant a seed, and then just out of nowhere something will emerge from it, even when you hadn't seen it. And I found that often in my network, it wasn't the first person I met, it's the next person or the next tier on beyond there that suddenly started to shape it. So I think you can kind of you can hold it too tightly, I guess, is just enjoy the networking piece, invest in it, and give back, because I think it will pay back in itself in due course.
Yeah, that's
and
great,
do it over
great
a beer.
Advice. And do it over a beer. Yeah, well, wherever you can. Yeah, the social. I'm missing the old face-to-face networking these days. I long for a networking event with a glass of wine. It's just, Zoom's great. It's helped my coaching go global, but it's not quite the same, is it, as the three-dimensional meet for a glass of wine or some bite to eat. But
and I also find actually in that there's amazing things that happen. So sometimes you can get something that you didn't even think about or didn't know about. And again, that's not just because of the amount.
That's how I met my husband, actually. A random convoluted networking story. I'll maybe save that for another day. It was like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where I tracked it back to, well, I only met him because of that, and all the way back, and you're like, gosh, that's frightening. Like, could have been completely different. It's yes. So
That feels like
always
a podcast
network.
in itself.
I know. Maybe I'll write a blog post about it. Now I'm going to try now to scroll down the comments without accidentally showing you all my curtains or doing anything crazy. So let's see. I can see. Let's have a look. Hello, Kirsty, who's joined us. Super. We've got a few more people who've joined us, which is fabulous to see. I think we got the question from Wendy. I don't think we've covered Jan's question. If anybody would like to ask James anything else before we wrap up for the evening, or indeed your lunchtime, please do pop it in the comments now. I'm conscious of everyone's time. I usually try and keep these to 45 minutes, but yeah, if anyone's got any other questions, do pile in. Maybe James and we could try and work out when we first met each other while we're waiting for the questions to come through. I think I probably was pestering you to headhunt you for a job or something. I think it was when I was at Norman Broadbent.
It was. Yeah, it was.
I think we met when I was in. I remember we met in St James's office when I was there. So
that's right.
Yeah, and probably 2010 then, 2010-ish.
Could be, yeah. I know one of the questions before was about me being a Boy Scout. I wasn't a Boy Scout.
Yeah, so do you know, actually, you're right. Lara, who isn't with us right now, but hopefully will watch back, Lara wanted to know why you weren't a Boy Scout. And, you know, you might want to share with the group as well how you were doing what's it called? Bobber job. Why were you doing Bobber job if you weren't a Boy Scout?
So to answer the question, I wasn't a Boy Scout because we actually moved around quite a lot when I was a child. So we were never really kind of settled in one area, and it was not one thing that I actually really wanted. I always wanted to be a footballer, so I wanted to play football and didn't do that. And then the Bobber Job week was, again, probably maybe a slightly darker side of doing other things. Was I always was interested to think quite creatively, and I always had this kind of passion for business and money. So I had a friend who was a Boy Scout who had an extra cap. So we went out and did Bobber Job week to try and raise money, not for the Scouts, but for our sweet fund. So we went down to the shops and bought some sweets off the back of it. But the only time it got really quite thorny was we knocked on a door and a guy came out, and he was one of the Scout leaders and started questioning me about which Scout pack I was part of. So I did feel a bit nervous doing his car. We did that very quickly and ran off.
I know, I love the fact you continued with the car washing, and you know, just stayed there and just held your ground.
It's integrity.
In your little hat.
I promised to do the job, so I did the job and took his money for it.
I took his money for sweets. That was excellent. Well, do you know, James, I don't think we've got any other questions. So so thank you so much for your time and for your insights. I always enjoy chatting with you, but it's been really interesting actually learning some more. And, certainly I think what's come across to me is the fact that, firstly, that you, with your HR hat on, actually will look at others and say, yeah, this is a good thing to do. This is, it is a good thing to do more than just your corporate job. Actually, it brings you positives yourself. It brings the organization positives, and it probably will contribute to having a sort of richer CV. We now have got another question. Sam, James, how would you recommend finding some causes to support or charities to volunteer with? That's a good question. So how do you find out who actually wants your help? I tried to volunteer for the Prince's Trust and they too full.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the important thing to start from is actually, where's your passion? So start with something that you're actually wanting to give something to, because often it's going to cause a compromise, right? It's going to take your time, or it's going to have some resource. The other thing I would also say is a lot of charities will say it's going to take X amount of time, and often it's more than the time that they ask for of you. And then I think actually then have a look in that field. It's quite easy to kind of research the charities that are out there. And a lot of them do need help, either volunteers or fundraising or any other expertise. The one thing I probably would kind of counsel on is sometimes it can feel quite like a long road. So you might get knocked back in the first instance, but if it's that passionate for you, don't give up, keep going.
Yeah.
I had a couple of knockbacks when I was thinking about supporting particularly bereavement charities, and so it can be a bit disheartening. But I think I would then take you to, once you found the charity and the opportunity that you want to support, you won't look back. I really think it's such a valuable experience that it's worth it in the end.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Thank you, James, and thanks
Pleasure.
everyone for joining us and for the questions. And I will be back in January with my next Facebook Live, which is going to be talking about strengths. And those of you that would like a free strengths profile, that is available. Drop me an email or have a look through the group for more information, and I'll send you some details on that. James will not be on that. James won't be presenting on that
Thankfully.
Facebook Live. But it's been an absolute pleasure. James is an active member of the group, though, everyone. So if you do have any other questions, please do always feel like you can ask. Post something in the group. It's there for you all. So please do post. Ask James any questions or anyone else, because it's really it's really good to sort of have conversations going on. So thank you, James. And
fabulous. Thanks for your time.
And I'm off to eat some chocolate and watch some Netflix now.
Enjoy.
You don't watch TV, but I watch a little bit of TV.
I eat
Thank
chocolate.
you, James. I will talk to you soon. Take care.
Right.
Good night,
Cheers.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.